The grinding shriek of a post-hole digger at dawn wasn't my alarm clock. It was war. I found them. 3 sunburnt men and Brenda McTavish, HOA president, smirking as they planted a fence post. Dead center, through my driveway. "Morning, Marcus," she chirped, a sound like nails on a chalkboard scraped by a dying banshee. "Just reclaiming common area." Per the covenants. My wife Sarah stood beside me in her bathrobe, hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury that mirrored my own rapidly cooling rage. My land, my survey markers, meticulously placed years ago, were apparently now decorative suggestions. They didn't know the ink on my surveyor's license was drier than their collective intellect, or that my federal clearance opened doors they couldn't even imagine, doors that often led to very small rooms with very uncomfortable chairs. This fence, a monument to petty tyranny erected in cheap, pressure-treated pine, wouldn't just come down. It would be their monument to catastrophic stupidity, a permanent exhibit in the museum of their own undoing. I took a slow breath, letting the icy calm settle in. This was not a negotiation. This was target acquisition. Brenda, resplendent in a floral muumuu that screamed tropical dictator, gestured magnanimously with a manicured hand. "We sent a notice, 30 days. It's for the aesthetic unity of the community, Marcus. Your unkempt driveway edge was an eyesore. An eyesore. The concrete poured 3 years prior was pristine. The edge was a neat line of river rock I'd laid myself. The only eyesore was Brenda, currently polluting my visual field and, imminently, my legal docket." "Brenda," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the inferno she was attempting to stoke, "that post is approximately 4 feet onto my titled property, and you are trespassing." Her smile tightened, a rictus of smug certainty. "Our records, approved by the HOA board, show otherwise. This is community land. We're simply defining the boundary." The workmen, to their credit, looked uneasy. They were just hourly grunts caught in the crossfire of a battle they hadn't enlisted for. But Brenda radiated confidence, the kind that only profound ignorance can bestow. Sarah finally found her voice, a tremor of outrage in it. "You can't just build a fence through our driveway. How are we supposed to get our cars out?" Brenda waved a dismissive hand. "You have half a driveway. That's perfectly adequate. Or you can park on the street, like some of the other less spacious properties." The condescension was a physical force. I could almost see it, shimmering in the morning air like heat off asphalt. I looked at the post, then at Brenda. "This will be your most expensive mistake, Brenda." Her laugh was brittle. "Threats, Marcus? Is that all you have? We have bylaws, we have a board. You have a very bisected driveway." She turned to the workmen. "Carry on, gentlemen. Let's get this section done before lunch." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Every inch of fence you build from this moment forward," I stated, each word a carefully placed explosive charge, "will simply add to the damages and the legal fees you and the HOA will be paying me." I met her gaze. "And Brenda, for the record, my full name is Marcus Thorne. Remember it. It'll be on a lot of paperwork you'll be seeing very soon." I turned, put my arm around Sarah, and led her back towards the house. The sound of the post-hole digger resumed, a soundtrack to their impending doom. They had no idea they weren't just violating a property line. They were violating a man who understood lines, legally, geographically, and morally, better than they understood their own names. The first phase of Operation Driveway Freedom was reconnaissance. Phase 2, active engagement, was about to begin. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. It was one thing to get a nasty letter about the precise shade of beige your mailbox was painted. It was another entirely to wake up to find your property physically invaded, your access deliberately choked, by an entity whose sole legitimate purpose was to ensure the communal pool didn't turn green. Back inside, Sarah was pacing, a storm gathering in her eyes. "Marcus, what are we going to do? Can they actually do this?" Lily, our 7-year-old, came downstairs, rubbing her eyes, drawn by the commotion. "Mommy, what's that noise? Are they building a fort?" The innocent question twisted something in my chest. A fort, Yes, a fort of bureaucratic imbecility. I knelt. Some silly people are putting up a fence in the wrong place, sweetie. Daddy's going to sort it out. Her brow furrowed. But can I still ride my bike down the driveway? The fence, if completed as planned, would leave a narrow channel, barely wide enough for a person, let alone a car, or a gleefully wobbling child on a bicycle. You will, I promised her, meeting Sarah's gaze over Lily's head. You absolutely will. The first call was to Gus, my neighbor 2 doors down. Retired aerospace engineer, current conspiracy theorist, and surprisingly adept at navigating the Byzantine labyrinth of online public records and obscure software. Gus, I said, dispensing with pleasantries. Project Mayhem is a go. Target: O. Nature of engagement: egregious overreach, property damage, willful stupidity. Gus, who had his own long-running skirmishes with Brenda over the approved species of rose bushes for front-facing gardens, cackled. Took him long enough to poke the bear. What'd the dragon lady do now? Demand you pave your lawn for parking uniformity? Worse, they're building a fence through my driveway. A stunned silence. Then, a low whistle. She's finally gone full banana republic. Okay, Marcus, what do you need? I've got my Tor browser warmed up and a fresh pot of coffee that could strip paint. I need every piece of communication, every meeting minute, every resolution pertaining to Lot 17, that's me, and any common area reclamation projects for the last 12 months. Specifically, look for the official notice Brenda claimed they sent. I checked my mail religiously. It never arrived. My own archives were extensive. As a land surveyor, particularly one with federal contracts, record-keeping wasn't just a habit. It was a creed. I had copies of my original plat, the county records, title insurance, even the satellite imagery from the past decade. The boundary lines were as clear as Brenda's delusion. While Gus burrowed into the digital entrails of the HOA's surprisingly insecure server, their password is HOA Rulezone 123. Seriously, Marcus, amateurs. I set up my own surveillance. A small, discreet time-lapse camera focused on the driveway, another covering the street to log the comings and goings of the construction crew and Brenda's frequent, gloating inspections. This wasn't just about being right. It was about building an irrefutable narrative, brick by evidentiary brick. By midday, the fence had progressed, a jagged scar of raw lumber bisecting the smooth concrete. Each new post was a fresh insult. Brenda drove by slowly in her golf cart, the unofficial chariot of HOA despots, a smug little wave directed at my darkened living room window. She probably imagined me fuming, helpless. She couldn't have been more wrong. I was documenting. I was calculating. I was preparing. Sarah brought me a sandwich. Any luck? She asked, her voice tight. Brenda's luck, I replied, taking a bite, is about to run spectacularly out. Gus called back late afternoon. Bingo. Found the meeting minutes from 3 months ago. Resolution 2023-7B. To authorize expenditure for boundary delineation and aesthetic improvement along the disputed common area adjacent to Lot 17. Disputed? By whom? Her imaginary friend, the zoning gnome. Anything about a formal notification to me? Negative. Just a note. President McTavish to personally inform affected resident, which obviously means she whispered it to a squirrel and called it due process. This was gold. Failure to notify. A critical procedural error. But I needed more than just procedural errors. I needed to dismantle their entire premise. The disputed common area was the key. They were relying on an outdated, inaccurate plat map, one probably drawn by a surveyor whose primary tool was a cocktail napkin and a crayon. My federal clearance gave me access to the USGS archives, the historical land grant surveys, things that predated the HOA by centuries. It was time to go deeper, to unearth the very bedrock of my property rights. The casual arrogance of it all was what truly rankled. They hadn't just made a mistake. They'd acted with malicious confidence, certain of their power, certain of my helplessness. That was the calculus they'd soon find fatally flawed. The next morning, the workmen were back, looking even less enthusiastic. I stepped out, carrying a clipboard and a digital camera. "Morning, gentlemen," I said, my tone studiously neutral. "Could I get the name of your company and your supervisor, please?" They exchanged nervous glances. The foreman, a burly man named Dave, wiped sweat from his brow. We're with Perimeter Perfection Fencing. Brenda McTavish hired us." "I understand," I said. "Just so you're aware, this installation is on private property, without the owner's consent, and is causing significant damage. I'm documenting everything for the pending legal action against both the HOA and, unfortunately, any contractors knowingly trespassing and damaging property." Dave's eyes widened slightly. "Brenda said this was all HOA land, all sorted." "Brenda," I said, allowing a thin sliver of ice into my voice, "is mistaken, dangerously so. Every post you plant is another zero on the check your company might have to write. I suggest you call your boss and have him call Brenda, and perhaps his lawyer." I took several clear, dated photographs of them, the fence, and its encroachment on my driveway. The effect was immediate. The whir of the auger ceased. Tools were slowly lowered. Dave pulled out his phone, already dialing. Brenda arrived in her golf cart less than 10 minutes later, a storm cloud in floral print. "Marcus Thorne, are you harassing these workers? They are under contract with the HOA." "Brenda," I said calmly, "I informed them of the legal realities of the situation. They are currently trespassing and causing criminal damage to my property under your explicit instruction. This is your last opportunity to halt this illegal construction and arrange for its immediate removal and the full remediation of my driveway. Refusal will be unwise." Her face purpled. "Unwise? You think you can intimidate me? The HOA stands by its records. This fence is going up. You are the one violating covenants by obstructing community improvement." "What specific covenant am I violating by wanting to use my own driveway, Brenda?" Cite the article in section. She sputtered. It's in the bylaws." "About maintaining community standards? This is a common area access point. It's my driveway, Brenda. Legally, unequivocally mine. And you have no right of access, let alone the right to build a permanent structure bisecting it." I held up my phone, which was recording audio. "Everything you say is being documented." This gave her a moment's pause, but her narcissism quickly overrode any nascent caution. "Good. Let it be documented how uncooperative and disruptive you are. This community deserves beauty, not your sprawling concrete." She turned to the still hesitant workman. "I am your client. You will continue, or there will be penalties for breach of contract." The foreman looked from her to me, a man caught between a rock and a very expensive hard place. I simply raised an eyebrow. He sighed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, if there's a property dispute, we gotta stand down till it's cleared up. Our insurance won't cover us working on contested land." Brenda looked as if he'd slapped her. "Contested? It's not contested. It's HOA property." "Then you'll have no problem," I interjected smoothly, "providing your definitive survey, stamped and sealed by a licensed surveyor, that supersedes my own deed and plat records. Until then, these gentlemen are wisely mitigating their liability." She glared at me, speechless for a rare moment. Then, with a strangled shriek of frustration, she spun her golf cart around and sped off, nearly clipping her own prize-winning petunias. The workmen started packing up their tools. Dave approached me, looking apologetic. "Sorry about this, Mr. Thorne. We just build 'em where they tell us. But yeah, this felt off from the get-go." "I appreciate your professionalism, Dave," I said. "Keep my card. If Brenda tries to penalize you, let me know. I might be able to help." He nodded, relieved. One small victory. But the fence, a hideous wooden spine, still jutted halfway across my driveway. This was just a tactical pause, not the end of the war. My next call was to a lawyer, a man named Arthur Jenkins, known for his bulldog tenacity and his utter disdain for petty tyrants. "Arthur," I said, "it's Marcus Thorne. I have an HOA situation that's escalated from nuisance to outright illegal land seizure." Arthur chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "An HOA, you say?" Those little fiefdoms of frustrated power? This should be amusing. Lay it on me. Arthur Jenkins listened, a series of grunts and occasional good gods punctuating my recital of events. When I got to the part about my federal clearance and the specific databases I could access regarding historical land surveys and grants, there was a significant pause. "Marcus," he said, his voice now carrying a different timbre, one of professional respect mixed with predatory interest, "you may be the most beautifully overqualified plaintiff I've ever encountered for an HOA dispute. This isn't just a fence. This is a gift. What exactly are you hoping to achieve?" "Complete removal of the fence," I stated. "Full restoration of my property to its original condition. All legal fees covered. And punitive damages substantial enough to ensure Brenda McTavish and her board think twice before ever misreading a map again. I also want a formal public apology from the HOA, read by Brenda herself at the next general meeting." Arthur let out a slow whistle. "You don't just want to win, Marcus. You want to salt the earth. They declared war, Arthur. I'm merely choosing the terms of their surrender." "I like it," he said. "Send me everything you have. Your survey, deeds, photos, Gus's findings on the lack of notification, your recording of Brenda's enlightened discourse. We'll draft a cease and desist letter that will make their toupees spin. We'll also file for a temporary restraining order to prevent any further construction or, heaven forbid, attempts to enforce their imaginary boundary with tow trucks." While Arthur began sharpening his legal knives, I delved into the federal archives. My clearance wasn't just a shiny badge. It was a key to data layers most civilian surveyors only dreamed of. I cross-referenced the original township grants from the 1800s with state-level digital cadastral databases and my own precise GPS readings. The picture that emerged was not just clear, it was damning. The HOA, in its infinite wisdom, was relying on a poorly digitized copy of a developer's preliminary plat from the 1970s, a document riddled with errors and clearly marked, "Not for legal conveyance or boundary determination." My property line, corroborated by centuries of consistent historical data and modern geodetic surveys, was exactly where I'd always known it to be. The common area Brenda was so keen to reclaim was, in fact, entirely within my parcel. There was no dispute. There was only HOA delusion. Gus, meanwhile, had unearthed another gem. Brenda McTavish's brother-in-law owned Perimeter Perfection Fencing. The contract for the HOA's boundary delineation project had been awarded without competitive bids. The price quoted was nearly 30% above market rate for the materials and labor involved. This was no longer just about a misplaced fence. This was about potential self-dealing, misuse of HOA funds, and a flagrant conflict of interest. The aroma of suburban corruption was strong. I compiled everything into a meticulously organized digital dossier, each file labeled with surgical precision. Exhibit A, Deed of Trust Lot 17. Exhibit B, Certified Survey Plat M. Thorne. Exhibit C, OA Resolution 2023. 7B, No Notification. Exhibit D, Audio Recording B, McTavish Admission of Instruction. Exhibit E, Historical Land Grant Overlay Analysis. Exhibit F, Perimeter Perfection Fencing Contract. Familial link. The file was growing, becoming a tactical nuclear device disguised as a PDF. Sarah watched me, a mix of concern and fierce pride in her eyes. "You're really going all out, aren't you? They built a fence through our life, Sarah," I said, my gaze unwavering. "They threatened our home, our peace. There's no halfway in responding to that." The cease and desist letter from Arthur, delivered by courier to Brenda's doorstep and the HOA's management company, was a masterpiece of legal evisceration. It cited property law, tort law, due process violations, and hinted darkly at potential fraud investigations. It demanded cessation of all activity, immediate removal of the offending structure, and a written assurance within 48 hours that all demands would be met, failing which litigation would commence without further notice. The response was predictable. A blustering letter from the HOA's lawyer, a local ambulance chaser named Stan Potemkin, whose letterhead looked like it was designed in 1992. It essentially reiterated Brenda's claims, accused me of harassment, and stated the HOA would vigorously defend its right to manage common areas. It was weak, full of boilerplate, and utterly failed to address the core evidence. They were doubling down on stupid. Excellent. The 48-hour deadline passed in a flurry of silence from the HOA, punctuated only by Brenda McTavish pointedly watering plants very near the half-built fence, a smug look plastered on her face whenever she thought I might be watching. She was performing defiance, unaware the stage was a courtroom and the audience a judge. Arthur filed the motion for a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction. The court date was set for the following week. "They're amateurs, Marcus," Arthur said over the phone, a distinct note of relish in his voice. Their lawyer's response was the legal equivalent of a toddler throwing a tantrum. He cited case law that was overturned a decade ago. "It's almost insulting." "Don't feel insulted, Arthur," I said. "Feel motivated." In the interim, I took a small, symbolic step. Under the watchful eye of my time-lapse camera, I carefully, and with meticulous precision, painted a bright yellow line on my driveway, exactly 1 inch on my side of where the fence posts intruded. Below it, in neat block letters, I stenciled, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Humiliated. It was petty, perhaps, but satisfying. It also served as a very clear visual for any judge or observer. Several neighbors, initially hesitant to get involved, started stopping by, ostensibly to walk their dogs, but really to get the latest intel. Old Mrs. Henderson from across the street, who had once been fined by Brenda for non-compliant garden gnomes, gave me a thumbs up and a conspiratorial wink. "Give her hell, Marcus," she whispered. She told me my prize-winning begonias were too flamboyant. The tide of neighborhood sentiment, once cowed by Brenda's iron fist in a velvet, and probably inappropriately patterned, glove, was beginning to turn. Gus, ever the provocateur, started flying his drone over the disputed territory, taking high-resolution aerial photos which he then, with my permission, artfully watermarked with McTavish's Folly and HOA Overreach Regional Mapping Project. He didn't post them publicly, not yet, but he made sure Brenda saw him operating it. Her shriek carried across 3 backyards. The days leading up to the court hearing were a blur of preparation. I reviewed my survey data, cross-referencing every point, every call, every bearing. I prepared visual aids, large format prints of the plats, the historical overlays, the photographs of the encroachment. I was treating this not as a simple property dispute, but as a full-spectrum dominance operation. My objective: unconditional surrender. The evening before the hearing, Sarah found me in the garage, calibrating my best theodolite. It wasn't strictly necessary for the court case, but the ritual calmed me. "Are you nervous?" she asked softly. I looked up, met her eyes. "No, I'm prepared. There's a difference. They picked a fight with a cartographer, Sarah, on his own map. There's only one way this ends." She smiled, a genuine, confident smile this time. "Go get 'em, honey. For Lily's bike rides. For Mrs. Henderson's gnomes. For all of us." The weight of that quiet support was more fortifying than any legal argument. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was for every homeowner who'd ever been bullied by an overzealous HOA board, for every petty injustice born in silence. Tomorrow, the silence would break. And Brenda McTavish was going to hear every damn word. The court was less a hallowed hall of justice and more a utilitarian box with flickering fluorescent lights, but the principle remained. This was where facts, ideally, trumped bluster. The courtroom was sparsely populated. Me, Sarah, Arthur Jenkins, radiating quiet confidence. On the other side, Brenda McTavish, flanked by Stan Potemkin, who looked like he'd slept in his suit, and 2 stony-faced HOA board members who seemed to be regretting every life choice that led them to this moment. Brenda, however, still wore an air of affronted majesty, as if her mere presence should sway the judge. Judge Eleanor Vance was a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed the initial filings with a practiced efficiency. "Mr. Potemkin," she began, her voice crisp, "your client, the Homeowners Association, asserts this fence is on common property. Mr. Thorne asserts it's on his private property, bisecting his driveway. This seems rather straightforward. What definitive proof does the HOA offer for its claim to this specific parcel of land?" Potemkin shuffled his papers, a man clearly out of his depth. "Your Honor, we have the community plat maps, approved by the board, which clearly delineate the common areas." He fumbled out a rather blurry, photocopied map. Arthur Jenkins rose smoothly. "Your Honor, if I may, we have Mr. Thorne, a licensed land surveyor with over 20 years of experience, including extensive work on federal boundary projects. He has personally surveyed his property. We also have his official deed, the county tax assessor's plat, and a historical land grant analysis prepared by Mr. Thorne using federally maintained databases, all of which," he paused for effect, placing a thick, neatly bound set of documents on the table, "irrefutably show the fence is not only on Mr. Thorne's property, but significantly encroaches upon it, rendering his driveway largely unusable." I watched Brenda's face. A flicker of something, doubt, annoyance, crossed her features as Arthur laid out the clear, professional exhibits. Judge Vance peered at Potemkin's flimsy map, then at the substantial dossier Arthur presented. "Mr. Potemkin, the document you've provided appears to be a preliminary developer's sketch. Is this the sole basis for your client's actions?" Potemkin stammered, It's what the HOA has always used, Your Honor. It was part of the original community planning." "Mr. Thorne," Judge Vance said, turning to me, "you are a land surveyor?" "Yes, Your Honor, for 22 years. My license is active in this state, and I hold a Level 3 federal geodetic clearance. This last bit wasn't strictly relevant to a simple property line, but it added a certain gravitas. Judges respect credentials." Brenda scoffed audibly. Judge Vance's gaze sharpened on her. "Ms. McTavish, do you have something to contribute? Or are you merely expressing general disapproval of due process?" Brenda flushed. "He's just trying to intimidate us with fancy titles, Your Honor. It's common land." "Then demonstrate that, Miss McTavish," the judge said coolly, "with evidence. Mr. Thorne, please briefly explain your findings." I stood. "Your Honor, my property boundaries are defined by metes and bounds descriptions tied to established geodetic control monuments. These are legally recorded with the county. The HOA appears to be using an unrecorded, non-binding conceptual drawing from the initial development phase, which lacks legal standing for boundary determination. My analysis, using historical GLO records and modern GPS measurements, confirms a consistent boundary line that places the entirety of my driveway, and approximately 5 additional feet of what the HOA is claiming, squarely within my titled parcel. I presented a large, clear overlay map. One layer showed the fuzzy HOA plat. The other, in sharp red lines, showed the actual, legally recorded boundary. The fence was depicted as a stark black line cutting deep into the red. It was visually undeniable. Judge Vance studied it intently. "Mr. Potemkin, do you have any registered survey, any legally binding document that contradicts Mr. Thorne's evidence?" Potemkin looked like a fish gasping for air. "Well, Your Honor, the HOA board acted in good faith, based on the documents available to them. Good faith does not negate trespass, Mr. Potemkin," Judge Vance said, her voice like chipping ice. "Nor does it negate the requirement to perform due diligence, especially when undertaking actions that deprive a homeowner of the use and enjoyment of their property. Was Mr. Thorne formally notified of this intended construction, with an opportunity to review the HOA's basis for its claim, and present his own evidence prior to construction commencing?" Silence from the HOA side. Arthur Jenkins supplied. "No, Your Honor. The HOA's own meeting minutes, obtained by Mr. Thorne, indicate their president, Ms. McTavish, was to personally inform him. He received no such information. He woke up to find a construction crew digging holes in his driveway. Judge Vance's expression was thunderous. She looked directly at Brenda McTavish. Ms. McTavish, did you or did you not ensure Mr. Thorne was properly and formally notified as per your own association's resolution? Brenda drew herself up. I may have mentioned it in passing at a community barbecue some months ago. He should have been paying attention. The sheer arrogance was stunning. Even Potemkin winced. Judge Vance leaned forward. Mentioned it in passing? At a barbecue? That's your definition of formal notification for the effective seizure of a significant portion of a homeowner's property? Ma'am, you are treading on dangerously thin ice, both for yourself and for the association you represent. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Judge Vance continued, her gaze unwavering on Brenda McTavish. This court finds Mr. Thorne's evidence compelling and the HOA's justification for its actions to be unsubstantiated and procedurally deficient. A temporary restraining order is granted, effective immediately, prohibiting any further construction or interference with Mr. Thorne's property. Furthermore, a preliminary injunction hearing is set for 10 days from now. Mr. Potemkin, I strongly advise your clients to use that time to seek a resolution with Mr. Thorne, one that involves the immediate removal of the fence and full remediation of his property. Failure to do so will likely result in this court ordering such, along with associated costs and potentially significant damages. She banged her gavel. Next case. Brenda looked like she'd been poleaxed. Potemkin was frantically stuffing papers into his worn briefcase, avoiding eye contact. The two board members looked physically ill. As we exited the courtroom, Arthur clapped me on the shoulder. Phase 1 complete, Marcus. Nicely done. Your calm under fire was commendable. Her barbecue notification defense was a particular highlight of incompetence. She's not used to being challenged by facts, I said, watching Brenda hiss something at her lawyer. She operates in a realm of pure, unadulterated assertion. Sarah squeezed my hand, relief flooding her face. You were amazing, Marcus. Back home, the half-built fence stood as a monument to Brenda's folly, now legally frozen in place. The news of the TRO spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, communicated via furtive texts and over-the-backyard fence whispers. Gus called, ecstatic. Heard you nuked him from orbit, Marcus. Did Brenda actually try the I told him at a potluck defense? That's classic. It was something like that, Gus. The judge was not amused. The next few days were quiet. No construction. No golf cart drive. Buys from Brenda. It was the calm before the inevitable capitulation, or if they were truly suicidal, the next round in court. Arthur received a call from Stan Potemkin 3 days later. His tone was considerably more conciliatory. He's asking for a settlement conference, Arthur relayed to me. Translation: they know they're cooked, and they want to minimize the damage. My terms are unchanged, Arthur, I said. Fence removal, full driveway restoration, all legal fees, punitive damages, and a public apology. The punitive damages and public apology will be the sticking points, Arthur mused. They'll cry poverty on the damages, and Brenda's ego will fight the apology to its last breath. Then we proceed to the injunction hearing, and let the judge mandate it, I stated flatly. Her ego is not my concern. My driveway is. The settlement conference was held at Arthur's office. Brenda arrived with Potemkin and one chastened board member, a Mr. Henderson. No relation to the gnome-loving Mrs. Henderson, thankfully. Brenda still attempted to project authority, but it was brittle now, easily cracked. Arthur laid out our terms with chilling precision. Potemkin countered with an offer to remove the fence and patch the driveway, with the HOA absorbing its own legal costs. No punitive damages, no reimbursement of Mr. Thorne's legal fees, and certainly no public apology, Potemkin stated, though he looked like he was reading from a script Brenda had forced him to memorize. Arthur simply smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. Then, gentlemen, and Ms. McTavish, we are at an impasse. We will see you at the injunction hearing, where we will be presenting evidence of bad faith, potential conflicts of interest regarding the fencing contractor, and requesting the court award treble damages for willful trespass and property damage, in addition to full legal costs, and an order compelling the apology. I believe Judge Vance will be very interested in the familial relationship between Miss U. McTavish and the owner of Perimeter Perfection Fencing, and the non-competitive bid for this ill-conceived project. Brenda's eyes widened. Potemkin's jaw sagged. Mr. Henderson suddenly looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. The conflict of interest card was one I'd held back for maximum impact. Gus's digging had paid off spectacularly. That's an outrageous accusation, Brenda blustered, but her voice lacked its usual force. It's a documented fact, Ms. McTavish, I said quietly, sliding a printout of the company registration and her brother-in-law's name across the table, one that adds a rather unpleasant dimension to this whole affair, suggesting this wasn't just incompetence, but potentially something far more venal. The silence in the room was thick enough to spread on toast. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. Stand, Brenda. Perhaps we should reconsider Mr. Thorne's terms. All of them. Brenda shot him a look that could curdle milk, but the fight was visibly draining out of her. Potemkin sighed, a sound of utter defeat. We may need a brief recess to discuss. The recess lasted 20 minutes. When they returned, their demeanor was one of complete surrender. Potemkin, looking exhausted, read from a newly scribbled note. The HOA agrees to the full and immediate removal of all fence materials from Mr. Thorne's property. The HOA agrees to contract a reputable, licensed, and insured concrete specialist, approved by Mr. Thorne, to repair all damage to the driveway, restoring it to its original or better condition, at the HOA's sole expense. The HOA agrees to reimburse Mr. Thorne for all reasonable legal fees incurred. The HOA agrees to pay punitive damages in the sum of, he paused, swallowed, $15,000. Arthur and I exchanged a quick glance. That was more than I'd privately hoped for. And, Potemkin continued, looking directly at Brenda, who stared fixedly at the tabletop, Ms. McTavish, as president of the HOA, will read a formal written apology, pre-approved by Mr. Thorne and his counsel, at the next general HOA meeting. Brenda made a small, strangled sound but didn't speak. We accept, Arthur said smoothly, before they could have second thoughts. The settlement agreement was drafted and signed within the hour. The relief was palpable, not just from us, but surprisingly from Mr. Henderson, who looked like a man freed from a hostage situation. Brenda signed her name with a vicious jab of the pen, her face a mask of controlled fury. The following Monday, a different crew arrived. Not Perimeter Perfection, but a highly rated concrete company I'd selected. They dismantled the offending fence with impressive efficiency. The posts were pulled, the holes meticulously filled and tamped. The ugly gash in my driveway was cut out, new rebar laid, and fresh concrete poured and smoothed. It was a work of art. By sunset, my driveway was whole again, pristine, a silent testament to a battle fought and won. The check for legal fees and punitive damages arrived a few days later. The $15,000 was symbolic, of course. The real victory was the principle, the reclamation of peace and property. But the money would fund a very nice family vacation. Lily was already drawing pictures of Disney World. The true climax, however, was the HOA general meeting. The community room was packed, an air of nervous anticipation hanging heavy. Word had spread. This wasn't just another boring discussion about sprinkler systems. This was a public reckoning. Brenda McTavish stood at the podium, a sheet of paper trembling in her hand. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The floral muumuu seemed less a statement of power and more a deflated parachute. She cleared her throat. As president of the Canyonside Homeowners Association, she began, her voice barely a whisper, then louder, forced, I am here to read a formal statement regarding the recent matter concerning Lot 17, the property of Mr. Marcus Thorne. She took a deep breath, visibly steeling herself. The HOA board and I, she read, each word seemingly dragged from her against its will, deeply regret the unauthorized and improper installation of a fence upon Mr. Thorne's private property. This action was taken based on incorrect information and a profound misunderstanding of the true property boundaries. A low murmur went through the crowd. We acknowledge that this caused significant distress and inconvenience to Mr. Thorne and his family. We failed to provide proper notification and due process, as required by our own bylaws and by common courtesy." She paused, and I could see the effort it took for her to continue. "The HOA accepts full responsibility for this error. The fence has been removed, and Mr. Thorne's property has been fully restored at HOA expense. Furthermore, all of Mr. Thorne's legal costs associated with this unfortunate incident have been reimbursed." Her eyes scanned the paper, and she visibly flinched at the next part. "On a personal note, as president, I, Brenda McTavish, offer my sincerest and unreserved apology to Mr. Marcus Thorne and Mrs. Sarah Thorne for the duress caused by my decisions and actions in this matter. My conduct fell short of the standards expected of this office. I deeply regret my role in this regrettable affair," she finished, her face burning. The silence in the room was absolute, then broken by a single distinct sound. Mrs. Henderson, starting a slow, deliberate clap. Others joined in, not for Brenda, but for the apology, for the justice finally served. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was a clear signal. The reign of unquestioned tyranny was over. Brenda McTavish didn't run for re-election as HOA president the following term. The familial link to perimeter perfection fencing, though not leading to criminal charges due to the settlement forestalling deeper investigation, became a persistent, unsavory rumor that clung to her like cheap perfume. Mr. Henderson, surprisingly, stepped up and won the presidency on a platform of transparency, competence, and actually reading the damn maps. He even consulted me, informally, on a couple of minor boundary questions for common areas, a gesture that spoke volumes. Gus became something of a local legend. The drone ranger, who helped take down Queen Brenda. He framed one of his aerial photos of McTavish's folly and presented it to me. It now hangs in my workshop, a reminder that even the most entrenched absurdity can be dismantled with facts, persistence, and a little bit of high-altitude perspective. Lily got her unfettered bike rides back. Sarah and I enjoyed watching her pedal triumphantly down the full expanse of our driveway, the concrete smooth and unbroken beneath her wheels. The yellow line I'd painted eventually faded, but its message lingered. Some boundaries are not to be crossed. We did go to Disney World. As we watched the fireworks explode over Cinderella's castle, a dazzling display of controlled pyrotechnics, I thought about the other kind of fireworks, the legal, emotional, and intensely personal kind we'd just endured. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing that, in our own small suburban kingdom, order had been restored, not by magic, but by meticulous, relentless, and legally lethal application of the truth. My federal clearance, while not directly brandished in court, had been the bedrock of my confidence, the source of the unassailable data that underpinned our victory. It was the quiet, unseen force multiplier. It taught me that sometimes the most powerful weapons are not loud or flashy, but are found in archives, in carefully drawn lines on a map, in the unyielding language of deeds and statutes. The fence itself became a sort of local cautionary tale. Newcomers would hear whispers of the Great Driveway War of '23 and how the HOA tried to build a fence through a surveyor's land. It was a lesson in humility for the HOA, a reminder that behind every front door lives someone with their own story, their own skills, and their own breaking point. My driveway was clear, my property lines secure, and the neighborhood, under new, more sensible leadership, was a little quieter, a little more respectful of the space between us and them. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of Brenda walking her poodle on the far side of the street. She never made eye contact, and that, in its own way, was a victory as satisfying as any court order. The silence of a humbled adversary is a uniquely pleasant sound. The world is full of lines, visible and invisible. Knowing where they are and defending them when necessary is not just a profession. It's a way of life. And as for HOAs, well, they serve a purpose, I suppose, but they too must operate within the lines. Or someone like me will be there to draw them. forcefully.